Espen Kraft.
Yeah.
How are you, sir?
Thank you. I'm fine. How are you?
Very good, thanks. How's Norway? How's things looking there today?
Pretty bleak, actually. Cold, rainy, foggy. Pretty miserable, actually. But that's a standard October here.
Pretty much like the UK.
Yeah, but it's a fine day to go inside and work in the studio.
Well, that's what we geeks like to do.
Yeah.
Espen, it's a real pleasure to have you on the channel here today. As I say, I found you online just you know, obviously with the kind of music I do, with the kind of channel I've got, it makes recommendations, and I clicked on you, and there's a lot of people doing what, you know, what not exactly what you're doing, but there's a lot of people doing what you and I are doing. But what you did really resonated with me, just the way you did things. And from what I can understand, Espen, is there's a lot of people, or not many, but there are people who like to do sort of authentic 80s style music. However, the difference with you is you do it in the most authentic way that I've seen, in the sense that you actually only use the synthesizers from that period.
Yeah, I do. And like you say, it is because I feel that that gives me the most authentic 80s pop, synth pop sound. At least I think it does. And I find that working with these old dogs gets my creative rivers flowing more than working just in the box on a laptop.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're a very sort of more tactile, hands-on, like the way it used to be, kind of.
Yeah. Basically, this is how I grew up being a musician in the actual 80s. So working like I did when I started out just takes me back and brings me those emotions that are important to me, for me to make that kind of music today, actually. Yeah.
And that's interesting, because I think there's a lot of people have moved to in the box these days, and it's a good thing in the sense that it gives people an opportunity because it's cheaper. However, I do feel that there is, I mean, I was at a synth fest here in the UK a couple of weekends ago at the synth fest, and there is a real difference to actually touching an instrument. It inspires you to work in a different way.
Yeah, because working on a computer always has a downside in that you have to deal with other stuff as well. When you're making music, you have to deal with pop-up windows, batteries that runs out, etc., boot up times, things like that. And with a hardware synthesizer, whether it's old or new, it's instant. It's at your fingertips, and you can just start playing whenever you feel like it. You don't have to deal with other stuff. You just turn it on and play.
Absolutely. There's no distractions. And I think this is something that we've talked about with other producers is that these days we spend probably 60% of our time is spent, you know, sorting out computer crashes and software, you know, and whereas back in the 80s, it was switch it on and go.
Yeah, so exactly.
Absolutely. So let's, as I say, if you've watched some of my videos, you know, this is not going to be like a formal sort of interrogation interview. We're going to say, oh, we're just talking as friends, and you've got this really great vibe about you that you know, you're really approachable. So we're just going to talk like two mates.
Yeah.
So let's start with sequencing. What do you use for sequencing?
Yeah, you have to understand that I make the Espen Kraft music, my releases. It is inspired, of course.
Yeah.
But I also work for clients doing much more modern stuff, and I too use a DAW. I use a computer. So I have more than one computer, and when I work for clients, I use Cubase as a sequencer in the box.
Okay.
I have to do quick turnarounds and sure, deliver results in a fast way. But when I do my own stuff, I almost always start off with a hardware sequencer from the 80s and work out a draft. And what type of sequencer I use, well, that depends actually on the mood I'm in at that time. So it can be anything from a Roland MC sequencer to a Yamaha QX sequencer to a Korg or whatever. I have more than one sequencer.
Well, I'm sure, as I said, I've seen your, you know, from the videos I've seen, you've got an impressive gear list there, Espen. And what's interesting as well is, I think when we work, you'll know this, you know, my years in the studios were more sort of in the 90s. That was sort of more my time. But this was also before sort of computers. And I do find, and you can agree with me here, that working with a sequencer is better in many ways because you tend to listen more. You know, these people are like staring at the screen often, and they'll say, oh, that doesn't look right. And then they'll make changes on what they see. And that's not actually the way music is designed. It's use your ears.
I think that's a very good point, actually. And I haven't thought much about it, but now as you mention it, that's 100% true, because you're working with an old school sequencer. You often have a tiny little display. Sometimes you don't have display at all, and that makes you listen actually to the tracks you're recording. If you quantize stuff, you have to listen to if the quantize is correct. Maybe you don't want any quantize. You have to really use your ears to listen to the tracks as you layer them down on the sequencers. So that's a good point. Yeah.
So I'm intrigued now. You say you obviously work for clients. So what are your clients typically? Are they they obviously gravitate to you because of the type of music you do, or do they?
Yeah, recently, let's say 2 years back, from 2 years back and until now, I've attracted more and more clients looking for that retro sound. I admit to that. But I also have 25 years as a pro studio musician, commercially studio owner, and session keyboardist, stuff like that. So I come from, I have a broad contact net here in Norway and other countries, which even to this day hire me for a lot of other stuff as well, theater thing, commercials, producing acoustic recordings in another studio. So I do a lot of stuff. This 80s thing I have going on YouTube, that was really something I started to do in my spare time, because I had that love still in me for that type of music. So it's really ironic that part of my music life has really started to take off, and now I have to beat people off at the door wanting me to work on their music, but I have to keep a little tiny hole for myself still. So I usually tend to work on the 80s stuff for myself.
Yeah, that's true. That is your first love. But Espen, what is so obviously, as I said, there are a lot of people that are doing this. So people always say the 80s is coming back, and I've been waiting for that for the last 30 years. But it doesn't come back. If we look at dance music now, and we're not going to go sort of too far off topic, but if we take like David Guetta with like electro, that had very strong 80s elements in it, albeit it wasn't very 80s. But you, on the other hand, are very authentically 80s. And the way you do it, it actually sounds like something that was from 85. It is so authentic, or mid 80s.
I can tell you what the secret is to sounding authentic, besides using hardware and stuff like that. And the thing is, David Guetta and all those guys today, they're making music that it is 80s inspired. In the compositions and arrangements, maybe to a certain degree, but in the sound is wrong if you want to do an authentic sound, because it's too much low end and too much compression and too much everything, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but that certainly takes away the 80s feeling for me, because if you listen to my songs, I roll basically everything below 75. And I usually go for the lighter end of the low end, as opposed to some other stuff done in the 80s. The American stuff had always more low end than the European stuff. And I'm definitely in the British tradition of doing 80s synth pop or pop music, because I have very little low end, and that's part of my 80s sound that I find is pretty spot on in terms of sound. Yeah.
That is interesting, Espen, and we'll talk about the Yamaha NS10s in a while. I'm sure you've got a pair of those, haven't you?
I sold, but I used them for 20 years. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, but if we look at the way, and I mean, we can talk. As I say, I've had a few people that have said, "Oh my God, one of my subscribers said he's so excited that I'm talking to you, because he said I'm one of his favorite YouTubers and you're one of his favorite YouTubers." So I'm very flattered to hear. Yeah. But so what I'm saying is, I definitely want to get you back on another. I want us to keep this going, because I think we've got some fascinating subjects. But if we look at the way the pop music has evolved these days, you know, sort of in the 80s and 90s, you had the mainstream pop scene and then you had the dance scene. Yeah. I find that commercial music these days, the mainstream pop music, it is dance music. And I find with modern production as well, there is so much emphasis on the groove and the bass and the bottom end that there's not much left in the terms of the sort of the mids and upper, as you know, which can't and it's not very melodically based. Everything these days seems groove based. Whereas I watch you, and who's completely 80s inspired, and I've listened to some of your original compositions too. Am I right in saying, Espen, that the 80s was the time where melody reigned supreme, and we've lost that these days? There's just no emphasis on that.
I think right. I think the 80s was the last decade where melody and chords and the heritage from the Beatles really came through in the most exciting way. At least for me, the 80s is my decade. And after we tipped over into the 90s, you started to get another feel of the dance music, and that has evolved into what you hear today. I think 90s Eurobeat and today's dance music has very much in common, except it's a much more heavy bass sound in the music today. But it's less emphasis on chords and melody structure, as you say, and more emphasis on groove and bottom end. And yeah, I think you're right on that. Yeah,
they go more for the sort of like. Also, as I say, it's a long subject. If you listen to a lot of music these days, it's almost like the producers these days have to cater for people with a short concentration span, because there's so much happening, like, all these like strange sounds, but there's sort of no. And I'm not sounding old-fashioned here. Maybe I am, but there's a lot. There's Espen, back me up here. There's a lot of good music out there.
Absolutely.
But it's not in the mainstream. What they're pushing on the mainstream today is dreadful. And if I listened to, you know, if you look, okay, and there's always been good music and bad music, but if I looked in the 80s and you had like the mainstream bands, think of, Depeche Mode, Duran Duran, Adam Ant, OMD, their approach was so grown up. But if you listen to the lyrics of contemporary pop music today, I really feel we've gone backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to comment on lyrics today, because most of the lyrics today are pretty, what should I say? It's quite.
Meeting a girl in the club and boom, boom, boom. And, you know, there's not much thought. But you see, what I'm trying to point out is, in the 80s and the 90s, we had music like that, but it was in the clubs. It wasn't on the mainstream. It wasn't on the radio. So what I'm saying is, pop music these days has been almost, excuse the term, bastardized by dance. You know, everything is so based on dancey. I saw one of your videos recently. You did a breakdown of the Never Ending Story.
Yeah,
that is one of those songs that always gives me gooseflesh. I mean, and it just goes to show, as you broke it down in that video, how many motives and melodic ideas were, you know, with a lot of music these days. And I don't want to sound like an old man. It's like there'll be like one idea. There's one motive running through it, and the whole song's based on it. But if you take like the Never Ending Story, for instance, as you've emphasized, it starts in the C, and then I think it changes key, and then it comes back, and then you've got the bridge, and it's beautiful. You know, the song with the sequence. You know, not just the song, but the production and everything.
Yeah, the use of modulation, which were actually used a lot in the 80s, has all but disappeared today. You almost never hear any modulation in pop music today, and that really takes away from the specialness of what pop music should be, at least to me.
Sure. Yeah, as I say, it's interesting when on my channel, you know, a lot of my subscribers are, you know, I'd say 35 and over. But I think, Espen, the saving grace are the fact that I have some teenagers who are following me now, and, you know, people in their early 20s who are actually saying that and they actually understand. Because when I pass an opinion and I say pop music has got worse, I have to say, well, it's my age. Whereas when I've got my younger subscribers, they're going, no, Vaughn, you're right. It is worse these days. And a lot of my subscribers say how they listen to music from the 80s, you know, the music that their parents used to listen to, and they recognize them as, you know, as they recognize the 80s as a better time for music, really.
Yeah. I too have a lot of younger viewers, and my YouTube stats also show me that most of my viewers are younger than myself, actually.
Okay.
And I'm pretty old. Let me
Come on.
admit to that. but I do have interaction with live people as well, among where I live and where I go. And I think you're right. I think people that are interested in music today of a certain age recognizes that pop music today is a lot different than from the 80s. And when I start talking to them, they admit to a lot of pop music today being quite boring, actually. As opposed to 80s music, where you had you had musically a lot more difference lyrically. You had more elaborate lyrics than you have today, which it's pretty much all about sex. And the videos also at the 80s, if you can see through the grainy cameras and low resolution, they actually had a lot of good ideas for videos. As today, it's just dancing women and underwear really in videos.
Well, it's like I also think, Espen, I think that technology has made making music a lot easier these days. It's more accessible, which isn't a good thing because there are less gatekeepers and it gives people a chance to get on the ladder. But it also means it's taken the expertise away from it. You know, when you can get basic software and just have such good results by doing nothing and pasting a few loops.
Yeah. You know, today everyone can be a computer as long as you have a laptop and you have Ableton Live. You can be a producer. But back in the 80s, it was the actual bands that played on the records. They had producers to guide and aid the process. But they had to. They wrote their own music. They wrote their own lyrics. They play the instruments, and they had to actually be able to play and perform. And you see none of that today. There are exceptions, of course, today, like Coldplay and stuff like that. But most of the time today, music is made by a producer on the laptop in a bedroom with a lady singing on the top line, and they release it, and some of it can be good. It's not that, but back then it was a whole different proposition altogether. Yeah.
It is interesting because, Espen, I coach some producers, and and some of them are most of them are. There's one I coach that is older than me, but most of them are younger than me, and one of them, the other, they obviously, he sent me a mix to listen to, and classic example, like I did when I was younger, far too much bass. You've got to learn less is more. So I gave him a Michael Jackson song to go listen to, and he thought that was a little bit strange because he's doing sort of like EDM and hard dance music. And I said, no. What you need to do as a producer is you need to listen to. You need to listen to every music and say what makes that music great. Not necessarily, albeit it's a very different type of style. And what I'm trying to point out is, Espen, what I was trying to show him, if we look at like the Michael Jackson productions, which were fantastic, they didn't have that deep, low sub bass. I mean, they probably rolled off at about as high as 60, I don't know. But they still sounded powerful, punchy, and dynamic.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that is definitely, I don't know what the education is like, on music production, and I never had formal training myself. But as you say, there just seems so much attention and emphasis on that deep, low bottom end. And I'm always like, where's the melody?
Yeah, exactly. And we could, I could talk for hours about frequencies and mixing level, because I'm trained in listening to frequencies, and that's a subject for another video perhaps. But the rolling of low end, but also harnessing the lower mid range is really something they specialized in the 80s, and that's where the energy of the track is coming from on an 80s recording. That's harnessing the lower mid range, and with today's producers, you can get that fantastic bottom end, and you can get the high end, of course, but it's often lacking in the mid range, and we shouldn't underestimate using the mid range, both on the vocal parts and on the instrumental parts. And when you have chords and melody on top of that are top notch, you get a fantastic record, both musically and technically. And sadly, that's often lacking today.
Absolutely right. So, if I were to ask you just to shout out some examples of artists or artists from the 80s that you looked up to?
Yeah, I started pretty early making composing. My first entry into the creative part of music was composing music, just on a home organ basically. And I went to the library, picked up books, so I learned chords and melodies, and I started composing. And when I was about 14, I really started listening to productions, and so you have the composition and you have the technical side of productions that melted together when I was about 14, and I started to see that as a whole.
You taught yourself everything.
I'm totally self-taught. Yeah.
Well done. High five to that. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. No one in my family has ever done anything with music, as far as I know. My mother just, I don't know why actually, but she did, and that's what's my starting point. A Yamaha D50 actually, for those interested in what type of organ that was. But enough of that. So when I was about 13, 14, I really started buying music on vinyl to really dig into the production side of things, and artists which appealed to me from a very early stage was if I have to name a few artists, Eurythmics was one of my earliest encounters with.
Dave Stewart, producer, yeah.
Dave Stewart, and remember back then on the vinyl, bringing back that vinyl, especially on albums, you can dig into the production, who produced it, where was it recorded, musicians. They often had a few lines under it saying what type of synths they used and who played the guitars, and you're really investigating that whole part of the vinyl. That was a big thing actually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because we didn't have any internet back then. I rarely had the ability the chance to pick up a music magazine, so I had to listen to the albums, the singles, and investigate what was written on the sleeves itself. So Eurythmics, Thompson Twins was a big influence in the beginning. Howard Jones, of course.
Howard Jones.
Depeche Mode from Some Great Reward. From that album on. I wasn't too keen on them before Some Great Reward, because I was very early interested in sampling, and sampling really took off on Construction Time Again, and then reached its pinnacle perhaps on Some Great Reward, as far as I'm concerned.
That's right. Yeah.
So Depeche, of course. Later it was the Pet Shop Boys, of course, and Pet Shop Boys was probably the band that was most into going the dancey part of synth pop.
The more dance. Yes.
New Order, of course, was a big influence back then, and a lot of the Italo. It wasn't called Italo disco back then. That term we've used a lot later, but all those producers coming from the south of Europe doing what we now call Italo disco was a big influence, because I always liked that raw synth sound that wasn't too processed. Yes. Like what Trevor Horn did with Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and Tony Mansfield did on the first Aha album, was very technical. Yeah. So that's just a few artists I pick at the top of my mind right now. Yeah.
Well, I mean, those are all names that I think I could say of my favorites as well, and we can all relate to. And I think anyone who doesn't like that music would acknowledge that everyone that you've mentioned, they were pioneers.
And more, of course. OMD, naturally.
Of course.
Gary Newman was a big influence in a way, not maybe on technical level or the performance thing, but what he was able to do and the way he stood out from all the rest was really intriguing. Yeah. Yes,
the way he sort of had his own spin, and Gary Newman was fascinating because there were other people on the scene for many years, and he kind of just showed up and just poof, quickly from saying he pissed a lot of people off for that. Yeah.
I've seen that Synth Britannia documentary where Anna McCluskey says, "Who's this guy from London?"
Yeah. We've been doing it for years, and who's he? Yeah, absolutely.
Hilarious. Yeah.
It is. But as I say, Espen, this is just going to be like a general chat on this video. As I say, I think I want to do another few with you, because I've got and this is going to go out on my GeeK TALK series. But I want to do some more with you, maybe where we delve deeply into like synthesizers and stuff like that. But just as a general thing there, I don't want you to list all the gear you've got because I think, I think you'll be. But I see you've got an emulator there. Is it the emulator 2?
No, actually, I don't have the emulator 2. I have an Emax.
Oh, it's the Emax, of course.
The
Yeah.
Emax, yeah.
Okay.
Because I've drawn. You can cut this out if you don't want it in the video. But I've drawn a line where I really don't want to buy the really ridiculously overpriced gear from the 80s. No. As much as I'd like to have a Jupiter 8 from Roland, it's like £10,000, and it's really not worth it in terms of sound, because you can get that sound from other cheaper 80s synths. So of course, if someone wants to donate a Jupiter 8, of course I'd say yes. but emulator 2 and the Jupiters and the really high-end Oberheims, I really can't go that route for my studio unless someone gives it to me. So for the emulator 2 sound, I've settled for the Emax, because that's basically the same sound for a lot cheaper price. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a thing, Espen, I talk about a lot on my channel, is this, this shiny syndrome, or this obsession producers these days have, with buying, especially these days, it's upgrade and upgrade. And I'm always encouraging people to be as outgraded, be as low tech as possible, because these days, and I don't know what your setup is, but I think you are a classic example, Espen, of someone who's you're not focused on the gear. You've got the gear, so when so when a project comes your way, you understand what gear you have, you know which synthesizer to go to, because you've used them for so long.
Yeah,
that is the thing. The problem the guys have got these days, and I've had this problem as well, is you keep buying new gear, and just as you've learned it, then you've got to learn something else. So I'm always encouraging people to be unashamedly out of date.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. Back then, when you saved up to buy a synth, you might have that synth for 2 years, and you had to really dig into that synth to get the most out of it, and you really learn that synth. And today you just buy another plugin, you buy another soft synth, and you really only use presets, and nothing wrong about using presets, but you really don't know how to harness the strength of each sound source you get, because you get so many plugins at the same time. So back then you really had to dig in what you had. And then the reason I have I have a lot of hardware synths today, but since I'm hardware based, I have to have more than one to get that full sound, because no one synth can do everything when you only use 80s hardware, because each synth had its strength and weaknesses. So I have to use more than one, but I'm actually no gear freak at all. And I get a lot of emails and chat requests on online social media from people thinking I'm actually a synth collector, and I'm interested in the synth for the value of the synth as a collector, but I'm really not interested in the synth as a collectible item at all. I'm interested in the synth because it's a tool to make the sound I want.
Absolutely. So that leads me to this question. So as I say, you've got the edge, because the instruments you're using now, a lot of those you've been using for 30 years, so you know those instruments so well. So if I can ask you, Espen, what was the most recent piece of gear you bought?
The most recent piece of gear I bought was actually the Korg Poly 61. I made a video of that for a couple of weeks ago. Not a video of the Korg Poly 61. I was using the arpeggiator to do some Italo stuff. But the Korg Poly 61 is my most recent synth. It came out in 1982 and was a direct competitor to the Roland Juno 6 or 60 back then. Yeah.
Okay, so and just repeating myself, you're not, because of what you're doing and you're so authentic and you've got everything there already, it makes sense to only use the synthesizers that were from the period that you're catering for, rather than, because I find with dance music and that these days, I think these guys are always trying to get the latest sounds and everything. And I correct me if, or agree or disagree with me, Espen, I just find that with synthesizers, I personally haven't heard any sound in the last 10 years that I haven't heard. It's like everything's just a very, it's not like when synthesizers first came out, you go, wow, oh, that's a new, we've heard everything. So everything's just a rehash of other things.
I remember vividly in 1987 when I first struck a chord on a Roland D50, and up to that point, you've had the DX, of course, from Yamaha, but when the D50 came with its PCM sampled attacks and the rest of the body of the sound, that was a moment that I'll never get to experience again, because striking that Fantasia sound or whatever from that D50, it was just mind blowing. And like you say, no synth today will make me feel the way I felt when I played the D50 for the first time, because there's only so much you can do with sound, and the synthesizer today is basically a rerun of sounds you've had before. You can assemble them in a certain way now, and you can modulate the sounds, and you can do all sorts of things, but the sound itself is always some variation of things done in the past. So I'm really not being forced to be a part of that run today of having the latest in tech. It's really refreshing and inspiring, actually, not having to be part of that race.
It's good, yeah, because it's a race you can't win.
Can't win it.
And it's so expensive. And the dilemma that a lot of people on my channel and the people I coach are always saying, they go, oh, I've got to upgrade the gear, and then it costs a lot of money to make music, but then there's no return on your investment, because people always, this is the question that people ask me, and like I have the answer, and that is, how do you make a living from this? And I don't have the answer to that, and I don't think anyone does. I just think you've got to find your place in the market, and you've obviously got your place in the market for which you are well known for. Your channel is not that old, is it?
No, like I said earlier in this day's chat, Vaughn, I started this channel of mine just as an escape from my daily routine doing other stuff. Yeah. And ironically, like I said, it's taken off, but it was really something I had to do for myself. Yeah. And I basically, a little before I made my first gear type tutorial, I released some of my own songs on this channel, but I got like 10-15 views. So I found out pretty early that if I wanted any kind of traction, momentum on my channel, I had to do a little bit differently. And then I thought, why not just make tutorials, gear reviews, and just show them how I used this stuff I already have. Yeah. And by doing that, I found that a lot of people really enjoyed it.
Well, this is,
and it's taken off from there.
Yeah, because it's the same with me. I just started the channel just because I can't even remember. I think I started mine as like a piano tutorial. I don't know what I was thinking, but then I thought it's quite difficult to teach people piano, because I'm like you, I taught myself, so I cannot actually teach people in a theoretical way. Anyway, long story short, so I thought, let me just start talking about things that I enjoy. Yeah. And as you say, I think we all introspective. We all think what we know, but we don't realize that what we know has a lot of value to other people. Yeah, as you proved.
Absolutely, and I think that I think our hearts really matters, because if you start with a YouTube channel doing things that you really don't love doing, it'll shine through, and people will be put off by it. But if you present a video with a content that people really get to see is your heart, that's what you love to do, I think that's an attraction in itself, and people will be fascinated by that. So being able to build my channel, at least, from stuff I love showing off. I love to show off gear tutorials and stuff about the 80s. People appreciate it.
Well, listen, and that's why we're talking today, because your enthusiasm shone through on those few videos. So, and I like your videos are like mine. I think they're even longer. Just like I'm like, oh my God, someone who makes longer videos than I do. Quite funny, as some people say to me, Vaughn, your videos are too. Well, my subscribers always say to me, Vaughn, we love your videos. They, and then sometimes I'll get a criticism from someone who's come to my channel for the first time, and they'll be like, your videos are too long. Yeah. And then I was watching Espen, and I went, Jesus, this guy's videos are really long. But then again, I think, as I say, I think you and I, Espen, I think we're not catering to be famous. Yeah, we're just sharing what we love, and it resonates with, and the people that it resonates with are happy to sit for 2 hours watching us tweak a synthesizer.
Absolutely. if a video of mine is 50 minutes long, it's because it has to be 50 minutes
Exactly.
long.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing. It's unavoidable. But also, and you know, it comes down to interest. You know, if but then again, your and our channels are quite different, but quite similar in certain ways. And what I like about what you do is like you will, like with me, I do like album reviews, but then I also like to break down the songs and explain to the people, you know. So if I'm reviewing Depeche Mode, I will say, okay, guys, I always say, guys, this is just my opinion, so it doesn't mean I'm right. But then I try to back up my opinion. And so, well, look, this is how I see it, and I'll break it down in a certain way. And you're very similar in that way, where you reverse engineer songs, but you actually also you synthesize the sound. So it's a very interesting channel. I think what you're doing is awesome. And I'm certain that after this video, a lot of my subscribers are going to, you know, jump onto your channel, and maybe I'll even steal a few of yours as well.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Absolutely.
Espen, I'm aware of the fact that we can talk all afternoon, and I really just wish I was there so we could have a beer. But
yeah.
I'm going to sort of I see we're coming up to the sort of the 40-minute mark now of the video, and I think I want to sort of I want to speak longer, but I want to end it because I want to I want to leave them gasping for some more.
Sure.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to, after this video, I'm going to get some links from you. And I want to put all the links underneath. So I just want to ask you just a few closing questions.
Sure.
So you do your own music, because you said you lived in London for a while. Is that right? So you were also following the dream of being the pop star, and then.
Yeah, you know, back in the mid-80s, we had Aha, right? 3 guys going to London with nothing more than their backpacks, trying to make it big, and they did make it big in London.
Yeah.
And a lot of other guys in Norway, including myself, tried to do the same. I went 5 years later in 1990, I think, or was it 91, wanting in on the pop action. But almost immediately after I arrived in London, the house boom, the acid house and stuff like that started really taking off. And that wasn't my thing really, so I just wandered around in London for a couple of years, actually, so more or less, but it never turned out to do anything for me. So I just went back to Norway and started building my music career here instead. Yeah,
because I think with dance music, especially in the 90s, it was so music based and it was so sort of drug fueled that lyrics and melody were kind of just got out the way. We kind of lost that in that 90s period. It went really sort of underground, so to speak.
Absolutely. If you take a group band like Inner City, an American band with Good Life was one of their hits, that's really a hard pumping track, and as much as I love it, I can't relate to it in a creative way. It's not who I am. It was not who I was back then. So I just sort of went home digging the music in a way, but I couldn't relate to it in a creative way.
Well, Espen, I'm going to ask you a question, and I think I know the answer to this, and I'm going to ask myself the question first and give myself. If they say, Vaughn, what is the most important element to music? And I always go, melody, hands down. Would you agree with that? Melody first before everything else.
If I can expand it to say chords and melody, that's my thing really, because to me it has to be chords as well as melody. But if you by saying melody also mean chords and melody, I agree 100%. Yeah.
And also if we just and there's so many examples, Espen, but if I always say to me, my humble measure of a good song is if you strip away all the electronics and just play it on the piano or an acoustic guitar. If it works that way, it's a good song. And that is where a lot of music these days will just fall flat. If we come back to a lot of, you can often hear when a song is, take a song like The Never Ending Story, and you know, I'm probably looking very uncool for saying that, but play it, the melody, just the melody itself, it's so inspired, and because it's so inspired, it can work in any way. You can add anything to it because the melody is the chicken, and if you haven't got the chicken, you haven't got good stew. The rest is all spice.
Absolutely. but then again, just to make conversation, if you take the 1984 track Relax by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, try playing that on the piano. It's almost impossible, but it's still good.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah. To the rule.
It's very production based. Yeah, absolutely. Trevor Horn, brilliant producer. Absolutely.
But actually, Trevor Horn and a couple of the other guys from that time, from that environment, actually have a group called the Producers. I don't know if you heard them. They do actually play to tribes and stuff like that on bass guitar. Trevor Horn plays the bass, and they actually make it work with acoustic instruments. So it is doable.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. Listen, and there's so much more we can talk about. So
no,
listen, you're a busy man. I know you've got a family and everything. So
sure.
you've obviously got your work cut out for you and stuff. But let's definitely keep in touch, Espen. I'm going to provide all the links to the bottom, and at the end of this video, I'll hit you on Facebook and just tell you when it's being released. But mate, I'm so happy to have met you. I love your channel. I really love what you're doing. You're really enthusiastic, and your passion and enthusiasm shines through. So I'm hoping you will come back on every now and then, and we can catch up and talk. And if I come to Norway or you come to London, let's have a beer. Absolutely.
Absolutely, we have a deal on that. Thanks for having me, Vaughn, on your channel, and maybe we'll talk again soon. Yeah.
We definitely will.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, my friend. Peace. All the best.
Okay.
Bye.